Good afternoon, everyone. I would first like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to share here some ideas with you. I've always felt that studying the past is interesting because it gives us tools to think about the present and to create a better future. So I am very grateful to be able to present examples here of how ancient Greek theater can be used to help people in difficult situations. About 2.5 millennia ago, ancient Greeks gathered on the slope of the Acropolis in Athens to attend performances of tragedies in which various characters were depicted as going through traumatizing experiences. Countless plays offered their audiences stories of exile, of cities destroyed by war, or of people experiencing such difficulties that they saw no other way out than committing suicide. Family drama, murder, and violence also feature at the heart of many of these tales, usually taking place in a distant mythological past. As early as the 4th century BC, the philosopher Aristotle understood that such spectacles had a cathartic effect. Tragedy was linked to the experience of pity and fear and allowed for a sort of distancing or purification from such strong emotions. Today, ancient Greek tragedies are still regularly used as an art form for humanitarian purposes in various contexts and situations. Attending and/or actively taking part in performance of such ancient plays helps people in personal or humanitarian crisis because they can identify with the characters of the stories and what they go through. The ways in which fictional characters express what they feel resonates with what people in similar situations nowadays still feel. In this talk, I will first present two different initiatives in which ancient Greek tragedy is used to help people, before discussing a number of questions specifically linked to the use of ancient theater in such contexts. The first initiative I would like to briefly present here takes the shape of a theater company, Theater of War Productions, created in 2009. Its director, Brian Juris, has successfully used theater, and very often ancient Greek theater and tragedies in particular, as a tool to help people and groups who experience various extremely difficult life situations: street violence, domestic violence, addictions, tensions between communities and police forces, racism, sexual violence, to name but a few. But I will focus here on a particular project: the use of ancient Greek tragedy as a tool to help army veterans return to civil life. The 2020 US National Veteran Suicide Prevention Report indicates that in 2018, the average number of veterans who commit suicide per day was between 17 and 18. Already looking for a way to help this particular population in the previous years, Brian Juris had found in an ancient Greek tragedy a particularly relevant tool. In a play composed by the tragedian Sophocles in the 5th century BC, one of the most important heroes of the Trojan War, Ajax himself, takes his own life after an episode of deep mental illness, resulting in the violent slaughter of animals, accompanied by feelings that he cannot save his honor and that death is the only solution for him. Interactions between the suffering soldier and his wife, partner, and their son are also depicted in the play in many details, making of it a detailed tableau of the type of feelings and difficulties soldiers returning to civil life might experience. Events organized by Brian Duris' company usually consist in a public performance where professional actors read a translation of the play to their audience and then organize and facilitate dialogue with this audience. Everyone is encouraged to express their feelings, the emotions they experienced while watching the performance. Thus, although the soldiers, or former soldiers rather, are not usually directly involved in the acting process, they nonetheless actively take part in the event. They are not mere spectators. Countless testimonies of veterans show that what the character in the play experiences exactly echoes their own thoughts and feelings. For example, doubts about the ability to come back to civil life, the dark feeling of possibly being a danger to their family, the idea that one maybe does not deserve to come back to normal human life after having lived in violence for a long time, and sometimes feelings of shame or of betrayal, depending on what experiences was lived during service time. A retired army commander said, I quote, "The first time I heard Ajax's speech, it knocked me back in my chair. It was me." Other veterans cried when listening to or reading some of Ajax's lines in the play. But how concretely did attending a performance of this ancient play help this particular population? After all, in the play, Ajax does indeed commit suicide, whereas the whole point of the initiative is the prevention of suicide among army veterans. Here again, the best way to discuss this, I think, is to rely on the testimonies of the veterans themselves. The idea that it made them realize that they were not alone in what they experienced, that many others in the audience had the exact same difficulties, seems to be a recurrent theme. Likewise, seeing themselves from an external point of view, that is, witnessing the suffering of the hero Ajax, while being conscious that it echoes their own suffering, was also mentioned as functioning as a wake-up call. More fundamentally, the performance of an ancient play detached from daily experience and contemporary concerns allowed and encouraged the members of the audience to freely express themselves, which was felt as very beneficial in a group where speaking of one's mental health or difficulties is sometimes taken as a sign of weakness. Let's now move to a very different context. The second initiative using ancient Greek theater for humanitarian purposes that I would like to present here focuses on Syrian exiled women. Now, several ancient tragedies have been used in the last few years to provide help to Syrian refugees in a variety of contexts and places. So I only present one here. It started a few years ago with director Omar Abu Sada staging a performance of The Trojan Women, originally a play from ancient Greek tragedian Euripides. So he staged a performance of The Trojan Women in Jordan with a cast of Syrian women. Linked to this performance was a movie entitled The Queens of Syria. So if you have your mobile phone handy, you can scan the QR code. It will direct you to the trailer. Otherwise, it's available freely on YouTube. The film was presented around the world and won numerous awards, contributing to public awareness about the life conditions of Syrian refugees. Euripides' Trojan Women is a play originally performed in Athens in the 5th century BC. The plot takes place in the aftermath of the Trojan War, just after the Greek allies destroyed the city of Troy. This play is somehow exceptional because instead of focusing on the winners, it focuses on the fate of the defeated Trojan women, without sparing any detail about all the horrors they experience: the murder of their children, rape, the loss of their status and possessions, exile, and so on. There is something darkly troubling, to say the least, in realizing that such horrors echo what women in war contexts still experience today. But it is also what makes the ancient play a useful tool for humanitarian purposes. And director Omar Abu Sada understood that federating a group of Syrian women refugees around the performance of such a play would be a way to help them. The performance, however, was not simply a re-performance of the original play, nor even a mere adaptation. The director closely worked with the Syrian women to embed their own words and emotions into the performance, thus literally giving them a voice at a time when they felt no one was hearing or listening to them. The idea was to use a work of art created in a distant past, in a foreign culture, in a different place, as a tool, as a facilitator for women refugees to deal with their own experiences, share them with others, and create a new work of art. As in the previous projects, the gathering of the women around the project and their active participation in it helped them feel that they were part of a community again and could recover their individuality and power of action. The reactions of Syrian women involved into this project and in the Queens of Syria movie project emphasize the way in which the similarities between the content of the original play and their own experiences had helped them share their difficult emotions and feelings and ultimately take control of them. You can see on the screen some of what these women said about the play and the whole experience. To the eyes of the Syrian women, however, it is not only their own situation that mattered. They saw in the theatrical performance and on a larger scale, the creation of the movie, a way of sharing their cry for help, a cry addressed to fellow human beings to consider them as part of humanity. Ancient Greek theater as an art form offers many advantages as a humanitarian tool. As works of art coming from the past, Greek tragedies are somehow disconnected from contemporary realities. They provide a safe space from which to think about difficult situations one might experience. The cultural and chronological distance act as filters and allow both actors and audience to conceptualize and observe suffering, including their own, from an external point of view, as it is reflected in what fictional characters experience. Painful experiences are suddenly projected into a distant and fictive past, which create a protective barrier between oneself and this suffering. Suffering is projected onto the stage. It can now be observed from a more detached point of view. It is quite interesting to note here that this distancing technique was actually already used by ancient Greeks. Indeed, the plot of the vast majority of the tragedies, at least the one we still have, takes place in a sort of undefined, distant mythological past. However, theatre is also a performative art in which actors and spectators become actively and physically involved. This might sound paradoxical, given what has just been said about ancient theatre as functioning as a way to put distance between oneself and painful experiences. But by becoming performers themselves, victims can experience suffering differently. By becoming actors playing the role of refugees, for example, actual displaced people can transform from victims experiencing suffering without active involvement to individuals who recover their power of action, their agency, and in a way control all the feelings of suffering. For a while, the emphasis is put not on their experiencing of suffering, but on their ability to depict it and communicate it to an audience. Here, the fact that those plays are ancient offers another advantage. There is no expectation that the text of the play should be a faithful translation or reproduction of the ancient one. Ancient tragedies can be freely adapted, modified, and so perhaps people involved in such projects feel even more free than with other types of artworks to include their own ideas and feelings into the performative experience. But once again, there is more to it than an individual journey from victim to actor. Taking part in staging a theater play allows people to enter a community as active participants, to play a role in a group. They are not just the outsiders at the margins of society who need help. They are integrated as individuals playing a role in a common project. They do not only become actors on stage, they become actors in a community. Through performances of ancient plays, the general audience, the theater professionals, the refugees, the veteran soldiers, for example, are federated around a common project where each has their role to play and which is a door open towards reintegration within society. Remains now to discuss two aspects of this use of ancient Greek theatre that require some more considerations. The first obvious question that arises when distressed people are invited to actively participate in a performance where characters go through the same kind of suffering as themselves is the following one. How to balance in a safe way the involvement in the acting process and the vulnerability of the victims. How to help victims become actors without having them go through the same pain again. Experiencing suffering again may be part of a therapeutic process, but there is indeed always the risk with a medium such as theatre, where participants, both actors and audience, are so closely involved into the performance that the distance provided by the theatrical medium and the fact that the play belongs to a distant past is not enough to provide a safe environment to go through trauma again. And indeed, sometimes participants in such projects have to leave because some elements of the plays are too close to their own experiences, and leaving them again, even if only fictionally, is too painful. If we come back to the ancient Greek tragedies used in the context of help offered to population not necessarily familiar with this type of art, another question must be considered: cultural differences. So this is, of course, a very complex and delicate question, and it will not be possible here to unpack all its implications. Let me just draw your attention here to a couple of points. It is important, I think, to be aware of the underlying risk of somehow imposing external cultural and aesthetic norms onto people whose cultural background is different. One of the ways to avoid this pitfall is to build the humanitarian projects around the notion of dialogue and welcome and elicit active input from the participants into the creation of the performance, as it has very well been done in the Syrian Women project. Ideally, then, humanitarian projects using ancient Greek theater should carefully balance the original contents of the plays, which, as we have seen, provide a useful distance to the world of the people helped, and the modifications brought to this content, and also to the performative aspects, in a way that allows the process of encouraging distressed people to become agents and actors again. It is really a matter of striking the right balance here. To conclude, let me ask a final question, perhaps the most obvious one that must be raised when discussing the value of art as a tool for humanitarian purposes. Is art really what people in difficult situations need? Are there no other much more pressing concerns than offering art to displaced populations, for example? The answer seems obvious, but also deserves further considerations. Of course, there would be something indecent about thinking that art alone may solve the worst trauma through which people in need of humanitarian help go. No one thinks that theater is going to literally feed people or provide required medical help or shelter. However, the fact that art is not always understood as a basic need is a crucial element in itself. In situations where life is reduced to a constant struggle to meet those basic needs, people can sometimes feel dehumanized. They might feel that they have lost everything that would qualify their life as human. That is, for example, a sense of belonging in a community, the ability, the security to share and express ideas and feelings, the understanding that their own individuality matters, their agency. Giving them the possibility to experience art again, whether actively or as spectators, listeners, give them back important elements of life which are not taken care of through other forms of help sometimes. It is, of course, not a matter of distracting people from their suffering. Art is not just a form of entertainment. It is a door to the most specific characteristics of what makes us human beings. Using art as a humanitarian tool may not help people physically survive, but it functions as an invitation back into humanity, addressed to everyone who might feel left out. Thank you.